Well, Nate Diaz avenges his loss from 2019 in the octagon as he beats Jorge Masvidal by a majority decision. And let me tell you, Diaz gave Masvidal a whole lot of punches, right? That's his style. He's going to hit you with a lot of jabs, a lot of hooks, maybe not the power, maybe not the pop, but he was able to secure the win against an individual who, they do not like each other, to say the least. And for more on this boxing match, we bring in CBS Sports boxing analyst Luke Thomas. And Luke, when you look at what we saw in this fight, what was your reaction to the scores by the judges and just the overall match where you had two contrasting styles, and in the end, the judges say, oh yeah, Nate Diaz, you're the victor?
Well, I'll say this. In terms of the scoring, one judge had it 95-95, the other one had it 97-93, then 98-92. Essentially 8 rounds to 2, 7 rounds to 3, and then 5 apiece is the way you could look at that because it's a 10-round bout. I think the one that had it 5-5 was really the closest. 7-3 is a little strong. 8-2 is crazy. I don't really agree with that. I had it 6 rounds to 4, so 6 for Nate Diaz. I did think he was the deserving guy, but I thought some of the scores were a little bit out there. However, you can't say it's any kind of robbery. Yes, your style contrast comment is correct. Nate Diaz always been a bit of a volume guy, always been a guy who fights in spurts at times, in terms of like really when he gets sustained offense, but just is touching you all the time, just touch. And then out of nowhere, he can begin to put things together. He did a lot of that, really also narrowing the distance at which they fought, which is kind of interesting. Now, Jorge Masvidal, after the fight, said, well, he was the one landing better power punches, and that is true. But you got to remember something very, very clearly here. MMA is not scored the same way that boxing is. So, for example, in MMA, you would only score ring generalship if, for example, the striking was equal. That's not the case in boxing. You add it on as well. What did we see with the striking? What did we see with the damage? Who landed more? And who was in charge of the ring? And Nate Diaz backed Masvidal up to the ropes or to the turnbuckle several times. And I think that really played a role with the judges. But honestly, the biggest takeaway that I have from this fight is, I gotta say, for two 39-year-old former MMA fighters, that was a pretty good fight. That wasn't terrible. And honestly, was it high-level boxing? No. Are these guys going to win a WBC title at 175 pounds by beating David Benavidez? No, they're definitely not going to do that. But they had a ridiculous pace, honestly, for 10 rounds. It was back and forth. As you mentioned before, the style contrast made it fun to watch on either side, and they gave you everything they had. If you paid $50 to watch the pay-per-view, I honestly feel like you got your money's worth. Mission accomplished, boys.
Absolutely. It was worth the watch. And I'm a casual, and I was there sitting, right, looking at these two fighters who, it's not their main craft, right? And they gave us a fight that we will remember. Might have not, as you said, might not be, the highest level of boxing, but it was something that we can enjoy, look back on now. When it comes to what is next, Luke, for Nate Diaz, he talked about, I'm going to beat Jake Paul's effing ass, right? What do you think about that? Well, the first fight he didn't. Remember, they've already fought once, and Jake Paul won that one very handily. So there's some we wouldn't want to lose sight of the fact that Jake Paul already beat him and probably would do so again. However, this bout was restorative for Nate Diaz. Like, this was a bout where, again, I thought some of the scores were a little wide, but he did not look lifeless. He looked a little bit lifeless in that first Jake Paul fight. He didn't look like he was super tired for long stretches of it or disinterested in it. He was focused, especially down the stretch. And I think that's going to restore a lot of people's faith about what he can do against Jake Paul. But honestly, Jake Paul might be in a bit of a weird spot, right? Because if he beats Mike Tyson, is he going to want to go back to a guy he already beat? Maybe, but it's hard to say. I honestly think somewhere out there, like, and I know I'm saying this, but like a KSI option is kind of out there. What if Mike Perry ends up doing really well against Jake Paul, but loses, but needs a dance partner? Something like that. that. And honestly, they might even run this one back for a third time. Obviously, a second boxing fight, but a third fight overall between them if you count MMA. I'm not so sure that would do poorly, especially if you had like a decent supporting cast on this. So the Jake Paul one is certainly possible, but I would not call it probable at the current stage unless Mike Tyson absolutely sends him to the land of wind and ghost, which at 58 years old, maybe not the likeliest scenario.
Right. Yeah, I don't see that happening from Mike Tyson in this fight when it comes to his age. Now, when you look at Jorge, right, how does he move on from this? Because I know he was clearly bothered by how the judges, were scoring, talking about how, maybe they were misjudging things because of the crowd reacting. Of course, it's in California. Nate Diaz has his crowd behind him. What's next for him?
Well, I got to say, he is right to an extent. When he says he's the guy that landed the more powerful punches consistently through the fight, that is true. He definitely was that guy. But the problem is, this is not, it's called boxing for a reason. It's not striking. It's boxing, which means the full slate of boxing criteria, everything that goes into it is involved. And there were just big portions of that he was kind of giving away through big, long stretches anyway, or at least pronounced moments that you can really remember in this contest. However, that aside, he also performed, I would say, generally speaking, quite ably. And so what you have to ask yourself is, if this was an audition for potentially a third fight with Nate Diaz, but if not that, something else, what could you get? Honestly, I don't think he's far apart from the KSI fight. I don't think he's far apart from a potential bout with Mike Perry. Darren Till had a fight over in the UK, I believe, in Dubai today. So he's kind of floating out there. There is somebody else on this, what you want to call it, like YouTube boxing thing is sort of an outdated name for it, but that kind of circuit. There's still an opponent out there that he could get potentially a big check in. Honestly, Floyd Mayweather was there tonight, and he seems, from what I understand, to still want to find an opponent to have across, from him that fans recognize. He still wants to do this. Could that be Jorge Masvidal? I don't know, but I wouldn't rule it out. I know a lot of folks might think that sounds crazy. It's not as crazy as it might sound. I actually have some reason to believe that is something that has been considered. So will they do that? Well, we'll have to see. But he did look pretty good. He did make a decent account of himself. He just didn't box enough to get the win tonight.
Right, and I would say that's still the win, even though, of course, he wanted to get the victory again over Nate Diaz. He still can be proud of what he showed to the nation and the world. Luke Thomas, we appreciate the time and the insight, man. And coming up, we'll have full highlights of Nate Diaz outlasting Jorge Masvidal with the volume of punches, maybe not necessarily the pop. It's coming up right here on CBS Sports HQ.